So hello, good morning and welcome to the video, and welcome to Puerto Princesa on the island of Palawan in the Philippines. When you book these 6 a.m. flights, you think, great, it'll be a wonderful way of getting an early start on your day, and you'll be jet lagged anyway, so it won't really feel like 6 a.m. And then the alarm clock goes off at 4 a.m. and you feel absolutely dug up. So this marks the furthest point I'll reach on my trip, and so the journey home begins now. It'll take me 4 flights to get back to London, the first of which will be this morning. It's the shortest from here in Puerto Princesa up to Manila, and I decided to fly on Cebu Pacific Airlines. I had a few choices, but I decided to go with a low-cost carrier to see what the experience is like and how it compares to a low-cost experience in Europe. Now, Cebu Pacific has quite a large network, and they have quite a large number of international flights as well, so it's quite an interesting airline to keep an eye on in this region. I couldn't get the app to work on my phone. I checked in and they didn't give me the opportunity to email myself a boarding pass, so all I have is a photograph of it that I took on my camera from my computer screen. And low-cost carriers can be a little bit fiddly about getting physical boarding passes if you're not prepared to pay them for the privilege. So let's see if I can first of all get into the terminal, and secondly whether I can get myself a physical boarding pass to guarantee that I'm going to be able to get on this plane. So if you'd like to see how that goes and what the experience of flying on an Asian low-cost carrier is like, stick around.
Hi, I'm Matt and this is Matt's Planet. I aim to entertain, educate and inspire with my travel adventures from planning to execution. I'll show you how you can travel in style for a lot less than you'd think. So subscribe so you can come with me. The Philippines only seems to want people entering their terminals who are actually travelling. It had been the same in Manila, so family photos and goodbyes have to take place outside. When it was my turn, the chap accepted the photo of my boarding pass and allowed me into the terminal. Unlike Manila, there was a security checkpoint just inside the entrance. This isn't the proper security check, so it's a bit superfluous, but it's relatively common to find this in developing parts of the world, and it's hard to argue with an airport offering more security than it perhaps has to provide. The Cebu Pacific desks were deserted, another clue that they deter human interaction through their pricing strategies. But the lovely agent was happy to help, and she told me that the photo on my phone was enough, but that I could print a physical pass from a kiosk behind me. Having this interaction brought with it the risk that they'd make me check my rollerboard, as Philippine Air had done when I'd flown in the other direction, but after weighing it, the agent said it was okay to carry on. I obviously looked like a big strong fella. And the kiosk duly printed a physical pass without complaint or fee. All good, and not a whiff of the low-cost nickel and diming you can experience on low-cost airlines in other parts of the world. There were some services landside, although the Dunkin' store didn't look open. This was still before 5 a.m, but I decided to head airside to see what was on offer there. The usual Asian security experience with a general apathy towards any liquids or laptops you may be carrying. Puerto Princesa Airport is small, with perhaps 20, maybe 25 daily departures, but there are still a few amenities airside. There is a lounge, so even though Cebu Pacific doesn't provide lounge access with any of its fares, you can still get in with priority or dragon passes, although not until 11 a.m. when the facility opens. If, like me, you're there at 5 a.m, you're limited to buying snacks from the small convenience store. I took a seat, and the frequent high-volume announcements meant I wasn't at risk of nodding off.
Bound for Manila, Miss Kristen May Havares.
One thing I noticed was that there wasn't a single digital departure board airside. There's only 4 gates, and you can see all of them from every point inside the terminal, so it's going to be difficult to go wrong, but it was unusual, and it probably explained the almost incessant announcements. It wasn't abundantly clear as to how Cebu Pacific's boarding process worked, but boarding group 2 was declared on my boarding pass, so I shuffled forward after the first wave of passengers had been accepted, and I was waved through into a holding pen. Although I barely broke step through that holding zone and was almost immediately out of the terminal to cross the apron to the plane. A beautiful dawn was, well, it was dawning. Row 18 for me that day, which was accessed via the significantly less popular rear door. A newish A320neo new engine option was performing Chariot's duties for us that morning, and it was less than 2 years old. Cebu Pacific is well known for cramming seats onto its planes. You'll find 459 economy seats in its A330-900 planes, where Virgin Atlantic's 3-cabin layout in the same equipment accommodates only 262, which is 43% fewer. Cebu Pacific didn't disappoint on this equipment, squeezing in 188 economy seats compared to the 180 BA fits into the same airframe. Cebu achieved this by narrowing legroom, which allows you to have an extra row and a third at the back, as you can see here. That last row of 2 does look like it's rather crammed in there, doesn't it? It's not a bad looking cabin, but the seats are extremely slimline. I couldn't find a published pitch statistic for these seats, but I'd guesstimate that this was 29 inches, give or take an inch. Not great, but very survivable on a flight booked to take 95 minutes that ended up that day being in the air for exactly an hour. A tray table, which did tray table things. No seat recline though, which again you can live with on short flights. Some low-cost airline advertising in your eye line, but I was pleasantly surprised to find USB charging ports between the seats. Excellent to see, which again belies the low-cost expectations you may have for this airline. Overhead lights and air vents too. The plane filled up and I ended up in a full row, and it was cramped, but it was okay. An on-time pushback, but we had a fairly lengthy hold before the runway was clear. Unusually, planes were both landing from and taking off towards the east. Prevailing winds usually mean planes land and take off in the same direction, but it was dead calm that morning, and this arrangement avoided planes having to fly over the town, which is very adjacent to the runway. But we were eventually up into a lovely Philippine morning and across the Palawan coastline over the Sulu Sea. You're never too old to enjoy an in-flight magazine route map, in my opinion. Puerto Princesa to Manila that day. Cebu Pacific has a significant network these days, both domestically and, over the page, internationally. Sydney to Dubai with a connection in Manila. I'm sure you'd get an excellent price, but the legroom would become an issue on flights of those lengths. The existence of an in-flight magazine is yet another clue that Cebu Pacific doesn't ramp its low-costness up to 10. No services included though, but there is a buy on board menu, a reasonably substantial one too, although as I'm sure this magazine covers those longer international flights as well as these short domestic ones, I'm not sure everything was available on every flight. 350 Philippine pesos is less than £5 or €6, which I thought was very reasonable. Nothing for me that morning though, even though I still had an absolute wodge of pesos in my pocket from my flight on Philippine Air in the other direction. So 99% of the entertainment available to me on that flight came from looking out of the window, and whilst the wing did get in the way a little, it was a very enjoyable view and a very enjoyable flight. And after an hour, we landed into Manila. Cebu Pacific is a low-cost carrier, but they didn't perhaps feel like one on this trip. There was no catering on board, but the ground experience was not noticeably different from what you might expect from a fuller service carrier. But, as I've said before, the real test of a low-cost carrier is when something goes wrong, and I was fortunate that nothing did on this flight. You don't have to spend long on Google researching Cebu Pacific before you find some awful stories about what can happen when they drop the ball. Although many full-service carriers leave their passengers in the lurch in those situations too, it has to be said. I'm not sure I'd be excited about spending 8 hours in a seat like that on an A330 across to Dubai when 459 passengers can be fighting over 7 toilets. But for an hour or two zipping around the Philippines or even Southeast Asia, no problem. Save your money and fly Cebu Pacific. We pulled up to a remote gate after landing, which is always a bit annoying, and disembarkation was only available through the front door. I had a lengthy self-transfer in Manila, so was in absolutely no hurry to get off, so I stayed in my seat and was one of the last few people to get up and move, only to find that Cebu Pacific had run out of buses. So we ended up standing on that strange step contraption for around 10 minutes before another bus turned up. And surprise, surprise, I didn't make it onto that bus either. It only took another couple of minutes for another bus to show up though, but it wasn't great to be left standing in the direct sun for 15 minutes. This was around 7:30 AM, so the day hadn't really gotten going yet, so it wasn't too unpleasant, but Cebu Pacific really should have done better here. We eventually made it into the terminal, Terminal 3 here at Manila Airport if you're taking notes. That's the newest and the nicest of the three here, although when it comes to niceness at Manila Airport, all things are relative. But as a domestic arrival there were no formalities and I was out relatively quickly and was off to check in for my next flight. Lifetime flight number 901 successfully completed. So thanks for watching, give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and please leave me a comment. Would you consider flying Cebu Pacific? Please consider subscribing if you're new, and if you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, there is a Patreon account link below. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.